Gridiron Grinder! Hut hut hike!
All right, party people, it's Gridiron Grinder time. I'm Ryan. With me, as always, is my buddy James. Just a couple of dudes hanging out, talking about what's going on in the NFL each week. Tonight is episode 151 of Gridiron Grinder, and we're going to kick things off with Name That Stadium like we always do. Then we're going to hit the news from this past week. After that, we're going to give you guys our fantasy football draft guide. We know fantasy season right around the corner. And last but not least, we'll close things off with our question of the week. And so, yeah, with all that being said, how's it going tonight, James?
It's going good. How's it going with you?
Going good, minus some Comic Con disturbances.
Yeah, traffic's ridiculous because of Comic Con, but hey, what can you do?
I got you. Well, in general, how's traffic been compared to LA? Better, I'm guessing?
Yeah, a lot better. Like sometimes, like there's like shit that happens. Like the other day, there was an accident when I had to was coming home, so it kind of slowed things up a little bit. But it's like
An improvement from where you were.
40, yeah, 40 miles, and it takes me like 45 minutes generally. So
Not too shabby, man. Not too shabby.
yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, hey, before we move on here, I just want to point out, James, we had a new subscriber this past week, and
Really?
it was anonymous, which most of them are. But whoever it is, we just want to say thank you, and we appreciate your support. Sometimes it tells us who it is, which is cool because then we can call them out by name. But anonymous or not, we'll take it. So thank you, whoever it is. Pretty awesome. And so, yeah, James, man, why don't you take that ball and run with it? We name that stadium, man.
What are we at? Like 25 subscribers now?
That's correct. We were at 25 big ones.
Getting up there pretty
Oh, yeah,
soon.
yeah.
All right, so name that stadium. This is where, as you can see, I'm kind of traveling around to stadiums that host NFL games. I generally try to tie it into something. And if you guess right, which I don't think we had any takers, I didn't check. I
Nope.
was running late today, so I. But if you guess right first, or the first person to guess right, we'll give you an extra special shout out. Bookmark it. You can play it over and over again. Last week I was in New York and I actually chose the Jets set up in MetLife because it was basically unofficially confirmed that the Jets were going to be on Hard Knocks this year. So, we love some Hard Knocks. So I went with that.
Yeah, I think it was pretty obvious last week. The
Yeah,
the
thought it was pretty obvious.
JETS on both sides of the screen. So yeah,
Yeah, I thought it was pretty obvious. Thought we would have a taker, but hey,
I
you
know,
know,
dude. You gave them the low hanging fruit, and no one went to pluck it. So what can you do?
yeah, and I'll give a little. This one's kind of a repeat from this off season. It's a kind of a old stomping ground I've been using recently because there's a lot of stuff happening there. So
Okay,
I'll
okay.
just give that hint out there. If you paid attention, it's the same photo many times. So
Yeah, if you're one of the 25, you may have seen it before. So cool. All right. Well, yeah. How about we move on over to our recap of the past week? And so, James, I actually came across a fair amount this past week. I'm not going to go
mhm.
deep on any of these things really, but just kind of cover them. And I'm sure I'm going to miss a few things. And so, whatever you see, feel free to fill in the gaps. But I think the biggest thing that I saw was the DeAndre Hopkins news. It looks like he's going to sign a 2-year deal with Tennessee worth $26 million. Um, it's strange because this was reported like basically right after we did our last show,
Mhm.
and I haven't seen like an update that it actually got done yet. And so I don't know if it happened and it just flew under the radar, or if he's still just expected to sign and it just hasn't happened yet. Um, in any
With
event,
with him, I haven't seen that it actually signed, but he did. Oh, he officially announced today, about 2 hours ago, that he signed with Tennessee.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
he officially announced it.
yeah, and I
So
mean, it would have been strange that maybe he, could still go back on it or whatever, but I like the fit. I think, they need a wide receiver one. I forget what's his name, that rookie that they had last year. They're expecting him to take a step up, but, with
mhm.
there being a true number one there, it'll help with that guy's development. Obviously, it'll help Tannehill take pressure off of Derrick Henry. Just all in all, it's going to be a big boost for that offense. And the team in general has been needing some talent. And so I don't know. I like it, man. What do you think?
I like it. I especially like it for Hopkins because one thing that kind of flies under the radar, and I forgot about this, and I heard this week when it was, he had posted to Twitter, something like hashtag Titans or something, and the coaching staff there is like the offensive coordinator there was the offensive coordinator when he was in Houston,
Okay.
or the receivers coach. Like he has familiarity with the coach. Vrabel was with him in Houston,
That's
so he
true.
has familiarity with the coaching staff there and the offense. Yeah, it might be a little bit different offense than when he was in Houston, but that familiarity will allow him to get up to speed really quick on that offense.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, and he's a pro. I'm sure he's going to get there. He's going to want to get there. And the dude's had basically a borderline Hall of Fame career, and so he's going to want to keep that going and pump those numbers, man.
Yeah, and the thing that I found funny is everyone knows Tennessee Titans used to be the Houston Oilers, so he's played with both teams that used to play in Houston,
Gotcha. Gotcha.
which I thought I found ironic now once he's there. Yeah, Tim Kelly is the offensive coordinator.
Okay.
I think he was the offensive coordinator. Yeah, he was ended in 19.
Okay.
And I think that's when Hopkins was traded, was 20. So
Gotcha.
1920, Tim Kelly was the offensive coordinator. He was also the tight ends coach before that and quality control. So he had various roles with Houston in his while Hopkins was there.
Okay, cool. Well, that's good, man. Good for him, and wish him the best. Obviously, want to see Tennessee and Vrabel do successful, and this just helps that whole group. So,
Yeah, and
um,
apparently it's 26 million guaranteed, but I thought there were incentives to where it could go to 15 or 16
oh,
per year.
I didn't know the full 26 was guaranteed. Okay, that's nice.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it was. I was looking for it, and we can come back to it. Yeah, yeah. So it's yeah, it can be up to 16 a year,
Okay.
but I'm trying to see. I thought I had heard if it was guaranteed, but I'm not seeing that real quick, so it
Gotcha.
might not be fully guaranteed.
Yeah, and I mean Hopkins, he's a guy that, as great as he's been, it's like he's always got some kind of nagging injury, which keeps him out of practice. And but at the same time, you also look at the other side where, his entire career basically until these last couple of years with Kyler Murray, he's not had a reliable quarterback, and he's put up huge numbers despite that. And so, you take the good with the bad with him, and it seems to be good overall, really good overall.
Yeah, so and the incentives like they're fairly easy for him to hit. It's 95 receptions, he gets a million. 1,050 yards, he gets another million, and 10 touchdowns, he gets another million.
Okay. Yeah.
So, but
Yeah,
yeah,
he could definitely hit those. I think the big thing is, he's got to stay on the field, and those are all attainable for him.
yeah, exactly. And I'm not seeing it. Like I swear I had read it was guaranteed, fully guaranteed, like the 26 per year. But
Eh, hey, no biggie. We'll get more in the coming weeks, I'm sure. All right, so a couple more deals here, James. The Jacksonville Jaguars have extended tight end Evan Ingram by 3 years, 41 and a quarter million. That's a pretty good deal for him. He he was a really good fit with these guys last year, and I know that like going into that, he sort of had like an underwhelming time with the Giants. You know, they drafted him a little bit higher up, and early on he kind of had like some wow factor, but like never was able to like maintain that high level with the
Hmm.
Giants. And I think, man, he was, a good safety blanket there, safety net, whatever, last year for Trevor Lawrence, and fit in really well with that offense, man.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like, with the Giants, he had some drop issues. I thought there were a couple games. I remember a couple years ago, the Giants lost a game where the ball was in his hands, and if he caught it, basically the Giants would have won the game, and he dropped it. Um, but I mean, I think he was also the only one that was franchise tagged that got a long term deal or that were still pending.
Oh yeah, well yeah, none of the running backs, that it didn't work out for any of them, and I'm sure you probably saw Saquon doing a little bit more crying about one way to show his worth is by holding out, and so
Yeah,
uh,
blah blah blah.
yeah, here we go. We'll see what happens there, and then I mean, bummer. I know we talked a little bit about this before, but Austin Eckler talked a little bit about his contract breakdown and like the trade request part of it breaking down, and he was like basically they wanted some really high draft picks, but they weren't willing to pay him commensurate with that level of draft picks, and he just felt like the team took advantage of him, and but he signed his deal, and it is what it is. It just, he got, in his opinion, the short end of the business stick. So,
Yeah, and I, I want to rewind back to Hopkins, his incentives.
sure.
It's a tiered incentive. So for receptions, it's 250,000 at 65 receptions. Then every 10, it's another 250,000. And the same with yards, where it's 750, he gets 250K, and then every 100, he gets another 250K. And
Okay.
then for touchdowns at 4, he gets 250K, and then every 2 after that, it's another 250,000.
Mm,
And apparently, the other contract that he was offered with New England was off. He was offered a maximum total of 15 million per year.
okay. Yeah, I think it would have been good him going either place, but I think Tennessee needed him more, and
Yeah.
so good for that team. All right, so then yeah, James, I had one more extension, which was defensive lineman Quinnen Williams with the New York
Hmm.
Jets. He has signed a 4-year, $96 million extension. The dude's been a beast in the middle of that defensive line for these guys. And, you know, it's not necessarily a household name unless you're a big football fan, because these, the big uglies in the middle, man, they don't get that same kind of like, I don't know, like media crazy, like the wide receivers and the quarterbacks and the running
Hmm.
backs. And so, but the dude, he's not an Aaron Donald type, but he's pretty damn good. He's one of the top tier defensive tackles. And so, nice to see the Jets lock him up. And it's important for them obviously to keep as much momentum going as they can now that they got Rodgers and it's basically an all-in season. You would hate to see one of these contract kind of things like throw a freaking fork in that road or something. And and this guy's obviously deserved it, so good for him.
Yeah, and isn't he now the second highest paid tackle behind Donald?
I would bet it is, yeah, 'cause I mean that's 24 million a year. That's up there, man.
Yeah, and that's temporary because there's a couple other contracts that are gonna be coming soon
Oh
to
yeah, the
that will.
leapfrog game. Yep.
Yeah.
And then there was one more, but I don't have the details on it. And it's, I was wondering if it was similar to the Hopkins one where maybe something came out and I just didn't see it yet. But I did see an article about Joe Mixon supposedly signing some extension to stay in Cincinnati. Um, I know that his contract situation was sort of a big deal earlier in the offseason, and people reading the tea leaves thought he was on his way out, and then it sounded like, well, maybe they came up with something. But I did a quick search and I didn't see anything. It was just um, like a quick snap on the NFL.com website that said, you know, they reached a deal for him to stay in Cincinnati. So, but I didn't have like a confirmation that a deal was signed. I didn't have, any details. How long's the extension? What kind of money? Anything like that. But, good for them to, I guess, keep him in the mix.
Yeah. Okay. So I just found a little bit once the page was they he has had 2 years left on his current deal, which was 4 year, 48 million.
Oh man, he still had 2 years on it, and there was a contract issue. Jeez. Okay. So yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
and I'm waiting for the page to load. They reworked it. He had
What do you want? More
ni-
guaranteed money or some shit?
yeah, so he had 9.4 million remaining, fully guaranteed. Um, blah blah blah. They restructured it. I'm not seeing any details on it.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm wondering what the beef was with him. I mean, if he still had 2 years left on the deal, man, I don't know. Especially for a running back, dude. That's like, ages. But hey,
Oh,
I
his
would.
his base salary. Oh, hold on. I think I just found it. It looks like his base salary is 6 million with incentives that can bring it up to 8 million.
Okay.
Blah blah blah. I think it's just so. I'm surprised this kind of isn't getting much more.
With all the running back complaints, you'd think that, yeah, maybe this one would make the news of, hey, some running backs do get deals.
Yeah, but it's a restructure, so it's not
Yeah.
an extension.
Oh, gotcha, gotcha. Okay, so it's still going to be 2 years. They're just like throwing him some more cash in some kind of way, probably.
Yeah, but I'm not seeing much. Rework contract. Yeah, there's nothing.
Okay. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think here. I mean, it's late in the season for them to like restructure for cap space. So, because like I could see if they were trying to prepare for like big deals for Burrow or Chase or whoever, but um, this is a weird time of year to be doing that kind of move.
Yeah, it is. I mean, maybe maybe
They're Yeah, they're
they're
just like,
lining it up, but
yeah.
it
Well,
because
yeah,
cutting him.
yeah. I mean, that could be it. It could be, hey, we got to do this with a number of guys to get ready, and so we're just going to start now. And
Yeah.
he's complaining, so we're going to throw a dog a bone, and we'll be in good shape when the time comes.
So apparently they were looking at possibly cutting him.
Yeah, that's all the stuff I heard going on most of the offseason was that he was on
Hmm.
the block, but they didn't like really make big moves in the draft or free agency to like replace him. And so it seemed like he was going to be there for at least one more year. It just was like a disgruntled kind of situation.
Yeah, and well, I mean, they would have saved him 10 million to cut him. So
Okay.
if they cut him, so
I mean, I like Mixon.
I don't know.
The whole migraine issue that he has going on, that bothers me a little bit, but it's when he's a pretty good running back, and he's a dual threat. He can catch and run and all the stuff that you want a guy to do.
Hmm.
It's just obviously that offense is all about Joe Burrow at this point. So
Yeah.
okay, so in other news, James, I saw Malik Jackson, the former defensive tackle for Denver and Jacksonville. He has retired. Dude had a solid 10-year career, not like at the Quinn and, Williams level, but um, he is was definitely a solid defensive tackle for a decade. And so, best of luck in his retirement. And then the Washington Commanders, we can talk about them for a minute. The sale was approved by the league, so Snyder officially out, the Harris Group officially in. And then I think the second part of it worth mentioning is that the Mary Jo White investigation is released. The details have been released on that investigation. And so I haven't gone through the details of it, but it was a source of controversy. And there were a lot of people reporting and suggesting that the NFL wasn't going to disclose the
Mm-hmm.
information related to that investigation, even though Roger Goodell said multiple times publicly that they were going to. I think the opinion was that there was going to be stuff that came out that made the league look bad, not just the team look bad, and so that the league was probably going to like find a way to shield it or something. But sounds like they stood up to their word and they released it. Whether or not it has the dirt that people think it was going to have, I don't know. But I guess we'll find out as we have time to digest it.
Yeah, so like my page is kind of fucking up right now, but I saw some of the details, and it is a little bit fucked up. Like what some of the stuff that came out, but the league fined him $60 million
Okay.
for stuff that happened, and to take care of all outstanding matters. Uh, so they found that he harassed a former marketing employee, or sexually harassed, and deliberately underreported the shareable NFL um, revenues. But part of it that I thought was fucked up was apparently so then this whole thing with the sexual harassment, he placed his hand on her thigh during a work-related dinner at a Washington D.C. restaurant and pushed her towards the backseat of his limousine after the dinner in an unsuccessful effort to have her ride with him.
Hmm. Okay.
And apparently they didn't find that he was involved in this, but a former senior executive of the club improperly took and viewed an unedited calendar photo of I guess a cheerleader for like their cheerleader calendar. Like
Yeah.
apparently there was a photo of the chick nude or something
Okay.
that it wasn't edited out and they took it. So he
Some creeper.
apparently yeah. So the Mary Jo White investigation found he didn't disclose $11 million in revenue, which
Okay.
doesn't seem like that much, but it was just him. I'm just kind of glancing. Like I haven't gone through the report, but that's just some of the headlines from it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and I read a separate article this past week, and how all this tied into the John Gruden firing with the
Mm-hmm.
Raiders. And that other article, I didn't take any notes of it for today, but, it was interesting in that one because they were saying the way so many of the emails got leaked, um, it was hard to know, like, trace them back to where they came from. And I guess DeMaurice Smith tried taking credit for some of them because Gruden like bashed him in some of the emails, and so
Mm-hmm.
DeMaurice Smith, potentially is one of the people that leaked them out. How he got them is a question, and some people think that Snyder had something to do with various sources getting them because he wanted to sabotage the league. But there's no like concrete evidence to any of that, and like everybody in Snyder's camp is like, why the hell would he have leaked stuff that was going to get him in trouble. And of course, other people are saying, well, he did it because he wanted to put the heat on someone else so that they stopped looking at him. I don't know, man. I don't know what I believe or whatever, but obviously Gruden's out. Now Snyder's out, and it's just wild because like the Gruden stuff goes back. I think it was like 10 years ago or something, and it's like, wow, if you guys are really going to go back and start digging up stuff from that, I mean, it just seems like, you're opening Pandora's box of we could go through anybody's email records now or whatever, and how many freaking skeletons are in the closet league wide that they could just start going after if they wanted to, you know?
Yeah.
And
So
yeah, but go ahead.
I
Yeah.
had I had read the same or a similar article, but the article I read stated it more as fact that Snyder was the one to release the emails,
Okay.
and the reason he released them was so the league would leave him, stop investigating him, and investigate Gruden to
Take the
kind of
attention off of him.
take the attention off of him and
Okay.
hope
Yeah,
that
because
it
like what?
was.
Yeah, because one of the things I heard was that Goodell disliked Gruden, and Snyder knew that, and so it was like Snyder gifting dirt to Goodell to get rid of Gruden, uh, to like get back in Goodell's good graces or something. And I don't know, man. It's hey, I guess it's good that it's all finally coming to a close and going to be in the rearview mirror. I'm sure, as people digest that investigative report or whatever, we'll have a few pieces of dirt to talk about in the coming weeks. But then it'll be bye bye, move on to the next thing.
Yeah, so I was glad, and it it was just like, but the article speculated that speculated that the leak of the emails led to further investigation of Daniel Snyder, not the opposite way.
Yeah, yeah, and that was like the thing that like the what I had heard about Snyder's camp denying it was, they were kind of like, come on, why would we do this when, if anything, it would just I don't know. I don't know. All right. Anything else on that, James?
No, it's just
Okay.
I went back and
Well, let's
found
move.
the article.
Yeah, let's move over to a little, I guess, happier or indifferent topic, depending on how you look at it. So, alternate uniforms, they're all the rage these days, James. We talked about the Lions a few weeks ago. They got their throwback. We talked about the Buccaneers last week with their creamsicle uniform they came out with. And it just keeps going. A few more popped up this past week. Looks like the Indianapolis Colts have come out with what they're calling an Indiana Knights uniform, which has a black helmet. And I've read two different articles on this. One of them says they went with a black helmet because it takes the team back to its roots. The other article says Indiana has never worn a black helmet, and this will be the first time they debut it. And so I'm not sure which one to believe, but whatever, I'm not too worried about it. Seattle, they also came out with a throwback. It is a 90s inspired jersey. And then Minnesota, they have what they're calling a classic throwback, which they're going to debut in week one. And the Cleveland Browns, I don't know if I'm sure there's more to the uniform, but the article was all about them having a white helmet for three of their games this year. And
Yeah,
I saw it. Hey, it looked all right, but it's different. It's I've got nothing against the change. Um, I do like teams like staying true to who they are, and it's like switching things up every now and then's cool, as long as we're not doing it all the time and like making some fucking, you know, I don't know, little carnival fucking display of it all over and over again to get attention. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I hadn't seen. I saw something about the Colts. That looks fucking sweet.
You like the Indiana Knights?
Yeah, it's basically like blue tops and pants with like white trim, and then instead of the white helmet, just black, but the same logo on it. That
Yeah.
looks pretty fucking good.
Well, I'm glad you like it. I designed it myself. Obviously, I'm kidding.
I don't know if I like the Browns alternate helmet though.
Where it's all like the whole uniform's white.
Yeah. So, but the Browns, that helmet, their white helmet, it just because they have the brown and white, two brown and then the one white stripe in the middle, it just flips the white and the orange
Hmm.
in the helmet. I don't know. It feels lazy to me.
Lazy, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, hey, who is making the uniforms for the Oregon Ducks? And somebody hire them and say, come on, the Browns need, if they're going to get a facelift, let's do it right.
Yeah, and Seattle's helmets look ridiculous.
Okay, I didn't see the Seattle one. I'm going to have to pull it up right now.
Oh, it's terrible. It's like a blue helmet that has like wings from like this point in the helmet, and it has like a wing back. It just looks ridiculous.
Okay. Yeah, I gotcha. I'm sure there's more pictures. The one I'm getting isn't really giving me the best angle here, but whatever. Not the end of the world. Um, but yeah, I'm sure between now and week one, we're going to get a few more teams come out and do this kind of thing because it's a popular thing.
Hmm.
Like I said, I'm all right with it. I just don't want to see it be like a revolving door of teams doing it all the time because then it's just like a sideshow. So. All right, so video game news, James. We have some Madden 99 rating stuff going on here. Travis Kelce has joined the 99 club. Zach Martin as well. Justin Jefferson and Aaron Donald for the seventh time, setting a Madden record, 7 times 99 overall on Madden. Um, it makes me wonder if that's it, just those four, or if there's going to be more in Madden's like slow play in the release of the 99 Club, because like each one of these had its own separate article on NFL.com, which seemed a little ridiculous to me. So but hey, they're all good, so good for them. And then we talked a little bit before the show, which we might as well hit now. Denzel Mims, former second round pick of the New York Jets, he was traded this past week to the Detroit Lions. Detroit is also getting a seventh round pick from the Jets, and in exchange, they're going to be giving the Jets a conditional sixth round pick. This is a very, very cheap deal, essentially, for the Lions, and it's for a guy that had a higher draft grade. He didn't really necessarily live up to that with the Jets, but like we talked about before the show, he's been living with Zach Wilson as his quarterback and a fairly deep wide receiver room, especially now. But for the Lions, it helps us because Jameson Williams, he's got that
Hmm.
6 game suspension, gives us some added depth there. And who knows, another year in the league, maybe Mims has taken a step forward and could potentially blossom in Detroit. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, hopefully it pans out. But I mean, it's a kind of a cheap deal for just swapping picks and you get a
Yeah,
receiver, so
yeah. If
it's
it
not
doesn't
that
work
bad.
out, there's really nothing lost. So, it's all good. And then, James, we were talking about Cleveland a minute ago. The Browns, they released their second year defensive tackle, Perion Winfrey.
Hmm.
Man, this guy, I liked him a lot last year when he got drafted. Um, he's under investigation for allegedly threatening a woman with a gun. Not a good situation. Cleveland like instantly released him, and so I don't know what that means for this guy and where it's all going, but obviously not a good situation. So
Yeah, it's not a good situation at all. I missed it, but just that description of it sounds terrible.
yeah, we hear about these way too many nowadays. All right, so other than that, I got two last pieces here. Linebacker news. I'll give you the bad news first. Former first round pick of the Detroit Lions, Jared Davis. He is out for the season. He's been playing with the Giants, and he suffered some kind of a knee injury, and so he's already been ruled out for the year, which is a bummer for him. I liked him. You know, he was on Hard Knocks with the Lions last year. Didn't end up
Hmm.
making the team, but you know, I thought we signed him and had him play a little bit, and then he somewhere along the line he got picked up by the Giants or whatever. But you know, I was always hopeful that whether it was with us or somewhere else, that guy would like start like you know maybe establish himself somewhere in a rotation and show because coming out of Florida, man, the dude he just looked like a freak athlete in a tackling machine, and it just never like translated in the NFL, man. So.
Yeah.
But the other linebacker news is Alex Highsmith, the linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He reached an extension with his contract of 4 years, $68 million. I probably should have put that towards the top with the other extensions, but hey, whatever, man. It's not all in order. Deal with it. All right,
Yeah,
that's all
that
I got, man. What am I missing here, James?
all right. The one thing you're missing, and I harp on this player a lot. I harp on him a lot. I don't think he's a winning quarterback. But there apparently this week there was a war of words between former GM Steve Keim and Kyler Murray.
Man,
So
Kyler Murray.
Kyler said, and this is partial quote, so I'm not saying everything he said, but he said, "I'm going to listen. I'm going to be coachable, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. But if the shit ain't working, at some point we all have to look in the mirror." He went further said, "I feel free in a sense, especially with the change of upstairs, general manager, in the organization. I feel like they've done a great job ever since they came in, holding people accountable, the leadership. They're really trying to build something from the ground up." So Keim responded.
Okay.
He said, "I think in terms of quarterbacks, what he said, you don't love it. Just because of the standpoint when he added the word but in generally behind a positive, the word but does not end in a positive light. I certainly don't want to hear that, and nor do fans want to hear a guy who's making $46.1 million a year blame anybody himself.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's a guy that blames people, yet at the same time, when you get that bag of cash, everyone expects you to take it on your shoulders, and that's what a franchise quarterback does."
Well, I mean, the comments, you know, from my perspective and opinion, it just goes to show that he's lacking some polish and he's
Mm-hmm.
lacking some maturity. He's not the only quarterback to ever behave like that. You know, I mean, we've seen countless fits with guys like Cam Newton and others, but it's, you know, I think that you kind of get accustomed to these quarterbacks having to be professional and like do and say the right things, and he's just not one of them that's going to fit that mold.
Yeah, and the thing that sticks out is it feels to me like Kine is trying to say, but not 100% saying, because if it were true, it would look really bad on Kine for giving him that contract
Yeah,
extension.
yeah.
But is kind of like saying, well, he's not accountable. He blames everyone else but himself for when shit goes bad.
uh, Aaron Rodgers, anyone? It's always someone else, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, of course, Rodgers maybe says things a little bit differently, but it's still the same thing. I'm going to blame everybody but me. So,
Hmm.
okay, what else you got, man?
That was about it.
Okay. Okay, well then, hey, it's time I can't believe we haven't done this yet, James. It's time for our fantasy football draft guide. And I tell you what, dude, I see people on like ESPN and all sorts of other sites. They do like an annual update to their draft guide. And so
Hmm.
this is our first one. I'm sure there's going to be little nuggets that we miss, and maybe we come back and we just keep building off of it every year here. But I think it's pretty cool we're doing it, man. I love me some fantasy football. I know a lot of people, they get all giddy about it as well, and they're always looking for some kind of tips and tricks. And, you and I obviously have plenty of years of experience doing this going back like, oh man, geez, I've been playing fantasy football for 20 years now, and you probably just as long. And so,
At
um,
least.
yeah, yeah, I'll say this: the first year I played fantasy football was 2003 Yahoo Fantasy Football. I do have buddies that go back years before that playing on the paper system where you would order a binder with all the players and stats and whatever,
Hmm.
and you'd have to like get on a conference call each week to do your waiver picks and shit like that. I'm so glad the technology's there, but um, you know, and I mean, it's come a long way too. I mean, we talk about like the player rankings and everything. I mean, they're like pretty freaking solid compared to where they were back then,
Hmm.
and they were, to us back then they were amazing, but just way better now. And so yeah, for this, James, we can attack it a number of different ways. You and I, we picked the topic. We didn't have like a ton of prep time between the two of us. I got my notes basically organized by like pre-draft things to be paying attention to, then stuff to pay attention to in the draft, and then a couple of like things to be thinking about after the draft. I've also got a separate set of notes that's like by position, just some of the intricacies that you should be paying attention to when you're looking at quarterbacks versus running backs or yada, yada, yada. And so lots of ways to skin that cat, man. How do you want to go about doing this, bud?
So I kind of have it as like do's and don'ts, so I can kind of do my do's and don'ts whatever way you want. I
Okay.
didn't really go. I didn't really go. I did a little bit on some positions, but um, not too much. But I did a lot. I focused a lot on like the do's and don'ts and like what to remember at your draft. Like the very first one is make sure you pay your dues before your draft. You
Oh,
know your
yeah.
commission.
Yeah, if you're
Your
paying. Yep.
if you're in a pay league, it helps your commissioner out that you paid in advance, so he's not having to hound you for the money throughout
God,
the
I've been there
season.
before. Yeah.
I would say before the draft, that's one of the most important things to do is pay the dues.
Yeah, I like that one. Man, I can't tell you how many times I've had to chase people down. And as a commissioner, I've had to kick people out of leagues for that kind of bullshit. And so it's not fun. But okay, well, I guess I guess let me let me give you some of my pre-draft notes. And if you have some do's or don'ts that maybe fit into that category, you can squeeze them in, and then we'll just kind of see where it goes. Does that sound good?
It sounds good to me.
All right, so pre-draft, one of the first things that I recommend for anybody is that you got to check your league settings and
Hmm.
scoring, obviously. You need to, like right off the bat, you got to know, are you in a standard scoring league or are you in PPR? Because those are the two big camps. And there's other leagues that do, uh, like two quarterback or individual defensive player or whatever else. But the two most common are standard scoring and PPR, and then
Hmm.
you typically have like a standard roster with a quarterback, two running backs, two wide receivers, a tight end. A lot of them have a flex now, and then a kicker and a defense. You're going to want to know what that roster composite is, and you're going to want to know what the bench spots are, so that as you're going into the draft, you can kind of like mentally say, okay, I'm going to allocate this many picks to running backs versus wide receivers versus tight ends. And you always have to be flexible, but it's good just to kind of give yourself a little bit of a skeleton to go in with.
Hmm.
And I also like looking at, when is the trade deadline? Because it's possible that you'll draft a guy knowing that he's got like a favorable early season schedule, but that, maybe there's like a rookie nipping on his heels or something, and you're going to want to try to dump him while his value's high. And so you want to check that, obviously, going into the draft, know that. And then I also like to know how are the quarterback points awarded, because a lot of leagues going back, I mean, this is 5+ years ago now, but a lot of leagues started cutting the touchdown points
Hmm.
for quarterbacks, and they started increasing the interception points or the negative points for
Yeah.
quarterbacks, and that's a huge factor because that can drastically change, where you put your quarterbacks in tiers and where you might want to take them in the draft, and so just keep those things in mind. You got any
Yeah.
any do's and
So
don'ts along those lines?
it's absolutely 100% important to know what your roster configuration is. You have a lot of crazy leagues where you have a super flex where it could be a
Yep.
quarterback, running back, wide receiver, or tight end. You have leagues that start two quarterbacks.
Yeah.
So knowing the settings, like the standard across the board, the general standard setting is a quarterback, two running backs, two wide receivers, a flex, and a tight end, kicker, a defense, special teams. You also need to know if you're doing a team defense, special teams, or if you're doing individual defensive players, because that could change a little bit of
Oh, that
the
takes it to a whole new level if you're
yeah.
doing individual IDP, as they call it, individual defensive players. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I dominate my league, my other league, which does IDP, because everybody starts drafting
Yeah.
defensive players way too early, and I save them. If you're doing an IDP league, save them to the end, because you don't because and you can stream them. I don't carry a backup at a position until like week 4, week 5, once you're getting established, because you never know how the season is going to go. And if you're doing IDP, it's generally like you'll have like two defensive players, two secondary. Your defensive player can be like either tackle, linebacker, or secondary, and that's where I'll have a defensive player, and I'll line my bye weeks up if I do have a bench guy, and then you'll have two linemen and two secondary players for IDP. That's the general setup. Sometimes it's three, but knowing these rules ahead of time can will help you when you get to the draft to know what to expect, where you're going to draft players, what you're going to look at. Because if your league does do IDP, then you might have players drop later in the draft because people are going to try to pick up like an Aaron Donald. But
Yep.
Aaron Donald doesn't always score the most fantasy points at defensive line, and each week, and so you'll get like a number 2 receiver in the 10th round because these people are idiots.
Yeah, they're not chasing the value. They're chasing a
Yeah.
name. And I think if you're doing an IDP, you got a lot more homework that you got to do ahead of time. And it,
Not.
and it sounds like for you, James, that gives you an edge because you're into doing that kind of homework. But that's my next thing is just do a little bit of homework pre-draft. Whether you
Mm-hmm.
go out, I used to always go and get a draft magazine. Sometimes I'd
Uh-huh.
have two or three of them just because I
Exactly.
love reading about it anyhow. But, a lot of it's online now. Read the player notes, find out what's going on with them. Are they in the doghouse with the coach? Are they, poised for success because the new scheme fits what they do perfectly or whatever? But, as part of the homework for me, it goes a lot to what you're saying, which is you want to find the value in the draft. And so I like to look at the ADP, which is the average draft position for guys. And then I like to say, okay, well, yeah, but he's in a pass first offense. He's going to get more targets. He's going to be better than that. And I like to figure out where am I getting the most value in the draft. And so it's like you never want to reach for a guy, but you want to make sure you're getting the best available at that point on the board. And so, doing a little bit of homework up front is going to help you get the most bang for your buck. And, I mean, obviously when the draft starts, you got to roll with the punches because you never know which way it's going to go. But doing some homework going in is going to give you an edge on the competition.
Yeah, and the homework also, you're going to want to do mock drafts. And my strategy for mock drafts is try to join a mock draft where I'm picking at the point where I would be picking in my actual fantasy draft, because that way you're able to get your timing. But with the mock drafts, some leagues do some crazy shit. Like my other league, like it's straight first two rounds. It's 1 through 10, 1 through 10, and then it snakes. Or
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
so that's
You know,
knowing the draft order and how they
yeah.
do the draft order is important, because when you do your mock draft, most mock drafts are going to be a snake, so you're going to have the timing there. So if your draft is slightly different than that, then pay attention to where you would be picking in a snake, because that will tell you like what players may be available.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. That was one of my next comments, which was, some leagues they're going to tell you what the draft order is well ahead of time. A
Hmm.
lot of them, if it's a random order, they might not let you know what it is until 30 minutes or an hour before the draft. In either case, as soon as you can find out, you want to know, because it's really important, especially in the earlier rounds of the draft. Once you get into like the fourth, fifth round, things like that, it doesn't have as big of an impact. It still can matter, but early on, you want to know, because if you're in the top five, odds are you're probably going to get the most value in going after a running back. But
Hmm.
if you're in the back five, or maybe you're in a 12 team league, something like that, that's where you want to start looking at, okay, maybe one of those top wide receivers is going to give you the most value. Or like you and I were talking about last week, maybe at the very end of the first round, you're bold enough to take a guy like Travis Kelce, who's leaps and bounds beyond any other tight end in fantasy football. And so the position definitely matters. And I like what
Yeah.
you're saying. Do a mock draft so you get an idea of who's going to actually be there when you draft, because the ADP can fool you sometimes. We
Hmm.
have leagues where, all the time you get like some random guy always jumps on Patrick Mahomes, or, wants to take a guy from their favorite team or whatever. And then all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, there's like guys here that I wasn't counting on. Who do I take? That's a good problem to have. But
Yeah.
sometimes it goes the other way, where people, they go all running back, and you think one of them's going to fall to you and he doesn't. And then you're like, oh man, is it too early to take a wide receiver? Well, just, know your draft spot and go into it having a good idea of how you're going to start things off.
Right. And you mentioned ADP. Yeah, ADP and knowing ADP is important, but that the ADP is it's what it is. It's an average.
Hmm.
Look at the entire picture. Like
Yeah, it's not gospel.
right, Mahomes or Kelsey's ADP seventh overall, but really look at so his so if you're picking 8, 9, yeah, you might be getting a little bit of value based on ADP. But what if you have a guy that's there that's going to be a higher or lesser drop off if you're coming back? Like just use ADP to plan and see who you think is going to be there. Like, but don't use it as if it's gospel.
Yeah, and because of the snake factor, that's where you get people that'll start reaching, especially early for guys.
Hmm.
And that's where, like, I mean, I saw it just the other year where a guy took Mahomes in the first round, and it was like, holy shit, man, that's early. But his argument was, well, I picked early in the first round, and I wasn't going to get to pick again until the very end of the second round, and I was pretty sure he was going to be gone by then, and I just had to have him on my team. You know, I wouldn't reach like that. I wouldn't do those things. Well, not necessarily, but it's, it is still a game. And so if there's a guy you want that bad, yeah, hey, have some fun with it, because if you're not enjoying it, why the hell are you doing it? But,
Hmm.
it just know that you want to limit those kind of reaches, because you're not going to be getting that kind of value.
Yeah, and the thing, don't do when you get to the draft. Don't drink the Kool Aid too much.
Yeah.
I I've definitely been victim of this, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, um, and worked a
Uh,
deal because he wasn't going to
to
fall to
my benefit, yes.
where I was drafting, and worked a deal with the person where I thought right around where he was going to be drafted, who wasn't as high on him as I was. Worked a trade out where I, which completely bit me in the ass.
Hey, we laugh about it, but
Yeah.
and I know, to you that laugh sort of hurts a little bit, but you know, it's nobody's got a crystal ball, right? I mean, the
Hmm.
dude looked like it was a match made in heaven, and sometimes you have to roll the dice, right? Because when you made that move felt great, and for me, it
Hmm.
was like, hey, it's good for me because I still got what I wanted plus some, and so
Yeah.
it worked out both ways in the draft. It just didn't work out in reality because he didn't live up to that expectation. So.
Ex- exactly. So if you have your heart set, don't get set on, oh, I want this player, because when I started getting hyped about Hilaire, he was going later, and he started climbing. His ADP started climbing,
Yep.
and everything, and knowing our league, I knew he wasn't gonna make it, and that's the other point is know your league, know the tendencies. Play in the same league multiple years, get the
Yeah.
tendencies of the other.
Do people go running back crazy?
Right.
Do they wait? What are what's the tendencies? Yep.
Yeah, and also look at who's auto drafting.
Oh yeah, auto draft is.
Don't even though I have I've chosen um, Gridiron Grinders over my other league's draft last year. I I was undefeated through like the first like 9 weeks based on auto draft. It's not in general. It's not a good strategy.
Yeah, because you might get a kicker in the seventh round.
Yeah, but that's the thing is if you have to auto draft, go through and do your own rankings
Yep.
because your auto draft will be based on your rankings, and make sure you change the settings to not automatically fill the roster. Because like if you're gonna have a kicker or need a kicker, or if you need a defense special teams, you're gonna want to leave those to the last anyway. So there's no difference in having a kicker or defense special teams that you pick up off the waiver wire than somebody you drafted in the 15th round.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I agree with that. Um, yeah, and I mean we see it every year. Somebody auto drafts, and if you're around that person in the draft, it helps you as you plan picks because well, he's just going to get the top guy available, and so it helps you figure out, okay, this guy's going to be there when I draft. But um, I would say my last pre-draft comment here, James, or tip or whatever you want to call it, is that in addition to knowing your draft spot, you want to be going into the draft with sort of a tentative game plan. And I know
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of talking about that, but some of the common ones that are out there are guys that are like traditional guys that are like you go running back, first two rounds. That's just what you do. That's an old school mentality, and I don't subscribe to that. There's other guys which is a little bit newer. They go zero running back where they say no, it's a pass first league now. Get the elite wide receivers before anybody else, and don't worry about running backs. For me, I don't recommend that at all. I think if you're maybe in a PPR league, it can ease some of the sting of not getting one of those top running backs. But in general, for me, I like to have balance. I want to at least get one of the top running backs and one of the top wide receivers if it's
Mm-hmm.
possible. I don't like risking, having like a deficiency in my roster. I want to have balance, and so, but you got to decide what's going to work for you. Is your focus maybe just going to be wide receivers and quarterbacks, and you're going to go zero running back? That could be part of your strategy, but just have a good reason for it if you're going to do it. Is all I'm saying.
Yeah. In general, for me, my rule is you want to get one of the top wide receivers and one of the top running backs. You want to try, but you also want to look at where you're drafting and who's available at that time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have that intention, but there's been many years where I've gone wide receiver,
Hmm.
there. It all depends on what you do when you do your own projections, and don't rely too heavily on the previous season, because last year doesn't matter. Do your
Yeah.
projections and figure out, okay, where am I going to get the better value? Am I going to get the better value going running back, running back? Am I going to go get a better value going wide receiver, running back? Look at the drop off and know when you're coming back. Like if you're first and you're 20th, then yeah, you're going to want to go running back, probably wide receiver, maybe running back again.
Yeah, and
Um,
when you're talking about the drop off, James, you're referring to like their projected points per game drop off, or
yeah.
I think it's good to clarify that for people that are watching because, like on Yahoo, for example, you can click on the flag by the guy's name, and it'll show you what they're projecting in points every week for that player. And so, yeah, like James is saying, it's good to kind of have an idea of what are the tiers for those positions and where do they drop off because if there's a run on running backs, you got to like time it right where you don't want to chase the run. You want to make sure that you're getting the best value, but also saving so that as the position drops off, maybe you get something later too. And so,
Hmm.
it's easier said than done at times, especially if you pick at one of the peaks of the draft. Like if you pick at 1 or 10 in a 10-team draft, holy cow, man, you're waiting so many picks before you go again that if there's a big run, you could just be shafted. But you just got to do your best to make your best guess at watching when those drop offs are going to happen.
Hmm. And the other the other last pre-draft thing I had was don't draft too early. Don't draft the first week in August. Don't
Oh
draft the
man,
second
yeah.
week
If you
in
have
August.
control over it, I'm glad you said that. In fact, I'm going to make a note of that.
You want to draft within a you want to draft after all the preseason games are done. This does two things because people can still get injured in those
Yep.
preseason games. Rosters aren't finalized. You'll have a week. You'll have about a week because I think the last preseason games on like Tuesday or Wednesday, the week before the season started, or might even be earlier than that. But you'll have that week to finalize yourself your information based on injuries. Like so many times when I've been in leagues that have drafted second week in August, I've
Oh,
had I've had
horrible.
number one picks get hurt in practice, and I mean then you're screwed.
You're SOL. Like there's no point even doing the league at that point. And
Hmm.
I've been there too, James. I was at a draft party where within an hour of taking a guy, he got fucking hurt in a preseason game, and it made my blood boil because it's like, man, you know, you you just don't want to be in a league that does it that early. And I know some guys, they're like, oh, well, the weekend before, it's always Labor Day and it's family time and this and that. Listen, you can do it on a weeknight. You have the first game's on a Thursday. Like talk to your commissioner. Try and get it as close to that first week as possible. Like
Hmm.
James is saying, holy cow, I'm glad you mentioned that. Okay, well, let's talk draft day. You're in the draft. The clock is ticking. There's some things you got to do. I would just say, James, right off the bat, I think you want to be decisive with your first pick. At this point, you should have done some homework going in. You got a pretty darn good idea of who's going to be there. And, you should know, hey, if it's between these two guys, I'm going this guy. And for me, I like to be assertive. I like to click that button instantly. It lets everybody else around you know that you know what the fuck you're doing. And then also, if you pick instantly like that, it can put the next guy on his fucking heels because
Hmm.
maybe he thought he had some more time for the clock to dip down. And who knows, he might not be ready for it. So you're putting pressure on your competition, which is like a double bonus there, man.
Yeah, I agree there. I generally map out different scenarios for my first round pick, and I knowing my leagues, they're different scenarios because I know what one league does, the other league's not necessarily going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I generally have an idea on who I'm targeting. Probably about have 3 to 4 players that I would be comfortable with, and I rank them. But with that said, the best player available isn't always the best pick.
That's a good point.
You know, you have, you might think he's a sure thing. He might be ranked the best. He's projected points. You know, if you if you have a gut feeling about something like you're going between, I don't know, Mike Williams and what's the guy? Keenan Allen. Say you're drafting between those ones. I just pulled two up. They're not going to be drafted near each other. But you're going between those two players, and you think both of them are pretty much a sure thing. You know, or even one of them, you think Keenan Allen is pretty much a sure thing. Know the news that's been happening and what's been going on with with the players, and you know, really, if you have an instinct that, hey, Mike Williams is a better draft pick than Keenan Allen here, you're probably right. There's something that you've picked up on.
Gut, man. Yeah.
Picked up on in the news, in watching football, that's telling you that, and go with your gut in those instances, because you never know what's going to happen. They may be a quote unquote sure thing, but you can't predict how well that player is going to do this year.
No, and you know, it's it goes back to what you were saying pre-draft about watching for the drop-offs. You know, it's like you need to be watching the board, and you need to be watching where the drop-offs at the different position groups could be coming, and try to get your best value there, because the best pick on the board, it's like, and I'll tell you, I'll give you, without being too specific, I commonly see in drafts, in standard scoring, that you get to the mid-tier running backs and the mid-tier wide receivers, and there are far fewer running backs than there are wide receivers.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you know that, and you're looking to get one of those mid-tier guys, whether it's a running back or a wide receiver, and let's just say Yahoo puts a wide receiver as the best player available, well, that might be in the way that they put together their list. But if you know there's really only 3 or 4 mid-tier running backs left, but you got 10 mid-tier wide receivers left, you got to take the running back, because it's drying up, and odds are you're going to be able to come back and get one of those wide receivers later. And so, watch the board and just be aware of that as best you can.
Yeah, and with that, watching the board and paying attention to what other people are doing is important. I regularly toggle back and forth between, especially when it gets to like the middle of the draft, between guys' rosters to see who they've drafted, who's there, what they're gonna draft, because that could change something. Like for instance, you draft after me, and say it's you back to back. So I'm 9, you're 10, 11, and I'm 12. If I'm between a couple players and I know you need running backs, and then I'm going to pick, and I need running backs, I'm going to pick my running back first.
Get him before I take him from you.
Before you take him, and then I'll come back, and if I also need wide receivers, come back and get the wide receiver.
Good old sniper move. I like it.
Yeah, but it's also with your drafts, I can't emphasize this enough. Don't overvalue a quarterback.
Okay, yeah, and let's talk about that, because I always hear both camps make their argument on it, and to me, I try to be as objective as possible. My tendency is to wait on quarterback, but sometimes you fall in love with a guy, and there's nothing wrong with going and getting him, because, like we talked about earlier, it is a game. You want to have fun. You want to have guys you like, whatever. But yeah, give me your opinion on that, James.
So I'll give the perfect instance of this. Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen are always drafted high.
Yeah.
They're drafted really high. In the last 3 years, according to my research, they have not averaged. I'm sorry. Last year, for instance, they both were drafted. I think their ADP last year, if I remember correctly, I didn't note it, was like second, third round for both of them.
Yep.
Neither of them averaged the most fantasy points per game last year. You can legitimately get a good quarterback, Jalen Hurts, for instance. Jalen Hurts had the most average points per game last year. Yeah, he didn't play the whole season, but still, you have so many productive quarterbacks later that if you overvalue the quarterback position, and like that one year, somebody drafted 3 quarterbacks in the league that you can only start one.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a bit aggressive because
Yeah.
I know a lot of people that stream quarterbacks, and so we'll talk about streaming, I'm sure, as we go. But it's like, especially if you're in a 10-team league, you can wait until near the end to get your quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't like who's there, usually you've got a handful of guys sitting there in the freaking waiver wire that you can just pick whichever one you like the best matchup every week and flip flop them around. It's just that quarterbacks are such big names, and some of them, like you're saying, Mahomes and Josh Allen, they're like iconic. People get so carried away with, oh, I got to have that guy on my team, and it's going to I'm going to feel good that I got like this guy, and he's like a cornerstone of my team every week. And it's like, okay, yeah, there's reason to say that he's better for XYZ, whatever. But once again, no crystal ball. And is he that much better than waiting 5 rounds and taking somebody else? It's hard to make that argument sometimes.
Yeah, and for instance, one article I read, it was a guy that he's a professional fantasy football writer, and he was in a professional fantasy football writer league, and he took his quarterbacks in rounds 12 and 13, and got Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, and Cousins is a great value fantasy quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I will say this though, James, which I know you're well aware of, but it's good to tell people because we're giving them our tips here. In the world of fantasy football, you do not have to be a really good quarterback in real life to be a really good quarterback in fantasy football.
Mm-hmm.
And like case in point is Justin Fields from last year. That's like a recent memory, easy one to point to. He really was not that great of a quarterback on the field, but his mobile ability got him a ton of rushing yards, which is a huge boost in fantasy football. This year, it's different. A lot of people think Fields could end up being the next Jalen Hurts, and he could be with development. He's got some similarities to his game. I don't really know, but all I'm saying is, especially if you're waiting on a quarterback, it helps to target those guys that have that rushing ability in their game because they're going to give you a safer floor when they get those rushing yards every week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of stuff when I was researching this was saying like don't draft a rushing quarterback, which I found that is odd. And then when I went into actually read the article on it, their reasoning for it was the risk of injury.
All right. Yeah.
But it's not like they're gonna get injured or necessarily like for instance,
yeah, but
Lamar
look at
Jackson.
last year. Look at how many non-rushing quarterbacks got hurt.
Yeah.
Stafford, Herbert. I mean, you could go on and on and on. I mean, you can't predict injuries either, so you got to be careful.
Yeah, and there's also it's also kind of like a supply and demand thing. You have fewer running backs that you can rely on to put up numbers each and every week versus quarterbacks you can rely on to put up numbers each and every week.
Yep. Yeah. So the demand's going to be on the running backs, man.
Yeah. So if you have the choice between drafting a running back that or you pretty sure is going to have a good year or is one of the consistent guys, then go with the running back. Or I mean, wide receivers the same thing. Like you have a ton of wide receivers in the league, but not every one of them is consistent.
Yep.
If
Yep.
you can wait 10 rounds to get the more consistent players first, and then come out with a good quarterback. Like for instance, I'll use Joe Burrow, who puts up pretty good fantasy numbers. His I think it was his rookie year. I drafted him in the 14th round.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I believe it.
And because not everyone was, they're like, oh, he's not going to do anything, blah 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 blah. And I drafted him to be my backup because my quarter, I believe this was my last year of being able to keep Deshaun Watson,
Hmm.
and so I kept Watson coming into the year. And then I drafted Joe Burrow in like the 14th round to project for the next year. He was my backup quarterback, but then the next year, if
Yeah.
since
And
I
that's a
would be able to
keeper
keep him,
league, so that's a whole
yeah,
different, can of worms for people. But um, yeah, it goes back to the pre-draft. Know your league settings and scoring. If you're in a keeper
hmm
league, you definitely want to be hunting for that value later in the draft as a guy you can stash for the next season.
yeah, and if you're in a keeper league, also know what your keeper value is. And how I do it is I kind of look at ADP and keeper value and try to find the best
Oh
value
yeah, the
there.
biggest discrepancy, which gives you the most value. Yep.
Yeah, I have a tendency of keeping a quarterback for a few years because generally what I do is I pick somebody like a rookie or somebody that's coming off a couple years late in the draft where I have a low like I 15th round pick my backup quarterback, and then
Yep.
so I'll have 13th round value and 11th round value. Like if the
Yeah.
next year his ADP is probably going to go up
Yeah, you bet
because
on a bounce back or, like a
yeah.
recover from injury or a development if he's a young guy. And yeah, you get a lot of bang for your buck that way, man.
Yeah, and it's so I mean, but you can get these productive quarterbacks late in the year. Like last year Geno Smith was one of the most productive quarterbacks, and the stat I found on it was in most leagues he was still available halfway through the season.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because people just couldn't believe it, and it's especially at quarterback, it's like a lot of people, they draft him early and then they feel like it's such a big investment or commitment that they've got to ride that guy to the end and that he's
hmm
going to pay off for him. It's just a matter of time. Okay, it's a game, and if the guy's not putting out the results, bounce him and get someone else, man. There's people out there. And I would say this, if you're in like a 12 team league or bigger, it's going to be a little bit thinner at quarterback. But if you're in a 10 team league, there are always suitable guys in the waiver wire. Just look for the one that has the right matchup every week. And don't be afraid to play in that game if you have to. But
hmm
it's a game. So if you want Mahomes, draft him early at your own risk, man.
Yeah, draft him early at your own risk, and know you're probably not going to have the
Well, you're
best
just
average points per
sacrificing
game
some.
quarterback.
Yeah, you're just sacrificing some value. But if it makes
Yeah,
it more fun for you, then that's fine. Then
right.
that's
But
where
the thing,
you know.
also the thing with Mahomes is he's even though he's not going to have the highest average points per game, he is really consistent. So you're not going to,
Yeah.
and he's really consistently up there at top five average points per game. So you're really not going to need a backup quarterback till his bye week. Which that's my next tip for during the draft. Pay attention to the bye weeks. I can't emphasize that one enough because yeah, when you're drafting a guy, you could get the top four running backs in the NFL. It doesn't fucking matter if they all have the same bye week.
Oh yeah, then you're gonna have a problem. Um, so James, I like what you're saying with that. I do always like put a little like disclaimer on the watch the week thing is like, try to not go too crazy about it because, the bye weeks can go until I think week 14 now. They go like crazy late. And, like if you end up with a couple guys that have a conflict in week 4, that's a bigger issue. But if you have guys with a conflict in like week 10 or later, I don't put as much concern into it because I know that so much is going to happen between now and then. I'm
Hmm.
probably going to trade a guy, or somebody's going to get hurt, or I'm going to find some diamond in the rough on the waiver wire or whatever, where it's definitely important. And if I'm looking in the draft and I got two evenly rated guys, I can go to the bye week to be the tiebreaker. But I'm not going to rack my brain if it's later buys, if that makes sense.
Yeah, which that does make sense, and I agree with you there that don't go too crazy with it, but don't hamper yourself too much
Yeah, don't
with.
intentionally neglect it and let it become an Achilles heel.
Yeah, I'm not saying focus 100% on the bye weeks. I'm saying just pay attention
Yeah,
to them.
yeah,
If you're in a flex league, and you have, you'll also kind of need to know what you'll need with the bye weeks. You'll need to know what you need for replacement players there,
yep,
and so that could make the decision where you have a running back, two running backs on bye in week 13, and your flex guy on bye in week 13, you might need another
yeah. You
running
might not
back,
have enough in your
another
bench to
backup wide
cover
receiver.
it.
Yeah, but it's also with your bench. Stack your bench. Get those players. Don't be afraid to. If you already have drafted your three starting wide receivers and there's like a can't miss wide receiver there on the board,
Yeah,
don't say, oh well, I'm going to go tight end here because I need a tight end. Don't be afraid to draft some guy that could be a stud that's going to be on your bench because number one, he could be a suitable replacement. Number two, you could, if he's doing well enough, you could trade one of the other guys
yep.
and have slide that person in and be not have no loss in points.
No, I like what you're saying there, and for me, it's just kind of a rule of thumb, but it's not like a hard and fast thing that I have to follow. But typically, and this goes back to my comments about like the mid-tier running backs and the mid-tier wide receivers. I'll find myself stacking up on running back before
Mm-hmm.
I stack up on wide receiver
Yes.
because I just, almost always know I'm going to be able to find like an equivalent kind of wide receiver later than I'm going to be able to get that running back. And so, it's kind of like what you're saying. If a better guy is there, but he's going to be a bench player, that's okay because you'll find a use for him, whether you trade him or somebody gets hurt or whatever the case may be. You want the best guys that you can have. Um, and then also, if it's later in the draft, that's where you got to be a little bit more strategic about your picks. And so it's like, look for the young running backs that maybe have a chance to dethrone a guy where they've got a lot of upside, or look for a wide receiver in a pass heavy team where even if he's their number three, he could still get a decent amount of targets every week. You want to find guys with upside, you don't want to find
Mm-hmm.
guys that are safe. And it's like people sometimes get it backwards. It's like they want the home run hitter early and then they want to take safe guys later on. Well, later on, a safe guy might only get you 2 points a week, and that's not even worth your time. You know, if you're going for safety, you want safety in an early pick because they should all have high potential. And you want the safest one with the highest potential. But
Mm-hmm.
later on, when it's basically a crapshoot, you want the one that has the most freaking home run potential so that if it does pay off, it's going to pay off big. And, like with running backs, it depends. Um, they don't all have to be home run hitters, but they can have value. Like, we talked about for years, like Naeem Hines in Indianapolis. You could get him at the very end of the draft, and because he was like such a valuable receiver out of that backfield, he would get you quality points every week. Okay, and so like that's a guy where I would say it's an exception to the home run thing because he's a guy that's going to fall in the draft and give you value in the draft. But I would say, pair them with some guys that are potential home run hitters because you want that
Hmm.
upside.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing with fantasy football is you're not going to nail your maybe your first round pick, but first maybe second round pick. After that, your wide receivers, your running backs, there's risks there. So you're going to want
Yeah.
to have people somebody that could potentially slide in and have that upside to. The example I read in it was it was an old article. It was talking about drafting upside, and it compared AJ Green and Rashad Bateman. If you think and what the quote was if you think so it was from 2022. If you think Ravens second wide receiver Rashad Bateman is destined for a breakout this season, he represents much higher upside than AJ Green, who had a clear role in Arizona.
Yeah.
So if you have a player that could have a breakout season for somebody that's going to have a clear role and it's not going to be that big a role, you might as well roll the dice for the upside
Sprinkle them in there. Yeah.
because you're not really gaining anything by having a player that's going to consistently get you 8 points when you could have a player that's going to he might get you 8 points, but he might get you 20.
Yep. Yep. That's huge. Yeah. You want the upside. All right. So I would say, like one more just sort of category here about the draft I have. Well, I got a few, but one of them is like, as it relates to players that you like. It's
Yes.
some guys go crazy and they want to take all the players from their home team or whatever. And, I would just say, hey, it is a game. You want to have fun. Get players that you like, but be smart about it. Like you don't want to have three guys from the same team because they're going to cannibalize each other. It's okay to get a wide receiver and a quarterback combo because if they have a good game, they can like have like, it gives you like sort of like a super boost in that particular week. But I would never get a quarterback, a wide receiver, and a running back from the same team because you're putting too many eggs in one basket. And so go ahead and get guys that you like. Go ahead and try to get your favorite player, but try to diversify a little bit if you
Right.
can.
The caveat there is when you had like a combination like Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson in Minnesota.
Yeah.
That's worthwhile because Dalvin Cook's gonna get the points, and Justin Jefferson's gonna get the points, no matter even though they are on the same team. That's where I wouldn't sprinkle in a third player from that team necessarily, but I wouldn't necessarily even sprinkle in Cousins from Minnesota because then you're just relying too heavily. But if you have the clear cut, and it would never have happened once Jefferson had his breakout and Dalvin Cook, where you could get both of them at the same time. But if you have the ability to take both of the players like that, surefire home run hitters, I wouldn't shy away from it, but I wouldn't rely too heavily on being able to find that combination.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's a good point. I like the way you said that. So this is like my last thing, in the draft, minus going into some positional stuff. But, I would say, man, it's going to sound silly, but talk some shit, man. There's either a message board or you're going to be doing it in person with people and you're doing it for fun, right? So you might as well razz some guys, get some shit talking going. You might throw someone off their game and distract them. Who knows? Even if you don't, you're just having fun with each other, fooling around a little bit. And so let it rip, man. I mean, it's it's freaking fantasy football. So I do it every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but no, I would say my last thing during the draft is kind of read the room. Like if you're in a league and it's your first year in the league and nobody's talking, man, just pipe down, keep it quiet.
Oh, you're saying just, when in Rome?
Yeah, like
Oh, I'd say that, man. Bull in a china shop. Shake them up, man. Piss them off.
Right, but like I'm saying, like my other league is my work league. I'm not going to say the same shit in my work league as I'm going to
Well,
say in
yeah,
our
you don't
league.
want to get fired.
Yeah, and it's not much as much getting fired. It's just like know what type of relationship you have
What's
with it. If it's
appropriate? Yeah,
yeah, what's appropriate for for
yeah.
that situation. I'm not.
In my leagues, it's appropriate to talk some shit,
Yeah,
but I know what you mean. I know what you mean. And I'm glad that you layered that in there because, yeah, if you're doing a work league and it's a serious thing, you maybe don't want to talk the kind of shit that I talk. So,
yeah.
all right, so let's go post draft here, James, because the draft, even when it's done, it's not over yet. And so it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I guess, hang on, let me back it up before we go post draft. One thing that's huge is, and I prescribe to this as much as possible. It doesn't work this way every year, but waiting on your tight end, your kicker, and your defense for your last three picks. And it can be in whatever order you want. And if you really want, you can get a guy earlier than that. It's not like you have to do it at the very end like that. But, unless you get a guy like Kelsey, um, tight ends are very often a crapshoot. Same with kickers. Even if you got a guy like Butker or Tucker, a lot of times they're getting touchdowns, which is only 1 point, and it's not three or four or five, whatever the field goals are. And then defenses, it's the same thing. The top defense every year usually falls big time in fantasy football the next year. And so, um, you know, with defenses, I try to find guys that are near the top of the league in sacks every year because it's like if you can get to the quarterback, you're going to put pressure on him. Sacks count for points, and then you're usually getting pressure for turnovers, which will be more points, whatever else. But what I was getting at with all that was wait until the end to take those guys if you can, but make sure you take those guys because sometimes your fantasy draft will be so close to week one that you can't go into waivers until after that first game is played. And if you forget to draft a defense or a kicker, it means you're playing week one without a guy. And so
Mhm.
you don't want to do that. So just, be cognizant of what's going on and make sure you fill all of your starting positions in your roster.
Yeah. So the example for that I'll say defenses.
Sure.
Could you name and I have a lot of stuff I have is notes I've been compiling. I didn't compile. I haven't gone through last year, so I have stats for 2021. Who was which defense averaged the most points per game in 2021?
In 2021. So not last year, the year before. Oh man, it's
You won't get it. I guarantee you won't get it.
no. If I was doing some of my fantasy homework, it might be a random stat that I'd get close on. But no, obviously, your
It was
people are.
Dallas.
Thank you.
Dallas.
People are
Dallas had
naturally going to
zero.
think of teams like San Francisco
Mhm.
and the Los Angeles Rams and guys like that, but it's rare that they repeat that success in fantasy. They might be that good on the field and they might stop teams from scoring, but they might not get all of the, you know, return touchdowns and interceptions and, all that stuff. It's like, a team one year could have 40 sacks and the next year drop to 25 and have the same amount of interceptions, and it just drastically changes. And so you just got to be cautious, getting carried away with those defenses, man.
Yeah. And this is gonna. I'm gonna take my point like on the Cowboys. The Cowboys had were the top fantasy defense in 2021. They averaged 9.6 points per game.
Yeah.
As kicker wise, Daniel Carlson in 2021 was the top rated kicker or top fantasy kicker in 21. He averaged 10.1 points per game.
Okay.
The point I'm making here is getting that best kicker that has all the buzz, or the best defense that has all the buzz. You're not getting that much of an upside.
Yeah, and
The,
you're not
the
going to
difference,
guess which one it is.
yeah, you're not going to guess which one it is, but the difference between the top kicker and the worst kicker that's going to be on a team, you're maybe talking 4 points a game at most. Same thing for defense. You're maybe talking 4 points a game, and that's not worthwhile to get to where you're going to have a drop off of 10 points per game from running backs or a top tier wide receiver 15. If you're in the right position to draft the the and you decide to do so because of how the board is falling, drafting like a Kelsey, yeah, you're going to have a lot more upside with Kelsey than the other unpredictables. But he's still unpredictable enough
Yep.
to where you have to question if it's really worth it unless it's the perfect situation and the perfect board.
Yep. Good point. Good point. All right, let's go post draft. And so post draft, one of the first things I would say is scope out the waiver wire because a lot of times there's going to be a guy that didn't get drafted that somehow got overlooked. And you might want to sneak in a quick waiver move if your league allows it before week one to maybe fine tune where you're like, oh shit, I should have taken this guy instead of that guy in round 15 or whatever. Um, but sometimes guys get hurt, and whatever happens, and Yahoo might like bury him way down on the rankings. And
Mm-hmm.
so, just scope it out real quick after the draft, see if anybody was overlooked, and adjust accordingly. But I would say don't force anything because obviously you drafted your guys for a reason. It's just if there's one that's like a glaring, like blatant, hey, you got to get this guy. How did we miss him? Go and do it.
Yeah, and that's my biggest and I put it a little bit throughout the season. You're wanting to scout out the waiver wire, not just right after your draft. The team you draft on draft day, that roster is not. It's guaranteed that that's not going to be your final. That's not your final roster. You're going to make moves. You're going to
Yep.
have to drop players. People are going to get hurt. Stuff's going to happen. Always keep an eye on the waiver wire. Keep an eye on know what the waiver rules are in your league. Be careful if you're dropping someone. Make sure that that's the player you want to drop. Don't be like, oh, this guy, and then like for instance, I'll use tight ends. Like you're streaming tight ends. No, and you have a tight end. Say you have Hawkinson, and you're going, and you see Uzoma had a great week the previous week. Know if his bye week's coming up the next week and he's available on the waiver wire because you don't want to swap him up then.
Yeah. Look ahead. Yeah.
Yeah,
For sure.
Look ahead, but always keep an eye on the waiver wire to see who's going to be available.
Oh yeah. 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 And so then, another thing post draft I like to do, James, which everybody should do, but it's you need to scope out your competition and
Mm-hmm.
see who you're going to be up against because now the rosters are set going into the season and you want to know who you're playing in week one and you need to find out real quick if you need to tweak your roster going into week one because you may have drafted sort of out of sequence with your running backs or your wide receivers or whatever the case may be because you found good value on the board and now you need to adjust your starting lineup to make sure that you come out of the gate real good in week one. And so just pay
Yeah,
attention to that.
yeah, and that's when you have your lineup. Yeah, you may have drafted the X running back before Y running back, but Y running back has a better matchup, which therefore he
Oh
has
yeah.
better projected points per game. This in week one, you're gonna want to play Y. Yeah, X running back is probably going to be your starter all year, but you're not locked in to that. You're not locked into who slides into your roster. Like for instance, in our league, I believe our keepers end up a lot of times on our bench because of where we're getting value for them. So we're getting
Yep.
the keepers in the 9th, 10th round. And for instance, if you're able to keep Damian Pierce,
Yeah.
is that his
Houston.
name? Yeah. No, I was second guessing if it was Damien. I
He's
was second
young,
guessing.
he's not a
Yeah.
household name yet, James.
Yeah. So one of your keepers is Damian Pierce, and you're getting the 13th round value on him by keeping him, and you draft running backs in the first round, running back in the third round, running back in the fourth. He's going to be buried on your bench, but he
Yep.
might really truly be your starter. So pay attention to and set your roster appropriately based on projected matchup, projected points, gut feeling, your instincts. Because if you're watching this video, you've probably been playing fantasy football, so you have experience with it. You know that you'll know, like, for instance, like this defense really always does good against this offense, and especially running backs. So you might not want to play that running back that week.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. Yeah, or Bill Belichick always shuts down a rookie quarterback, or
Yeah,
whatever it is.
exactly.
It's like you just say, okay, yeah, I know this, and I'm going to feel good about making my adjustment accordingly.
Hmm.
Um, this is just a random note. It's not necessarily a post draft thing. It's just in general. Is that in years past, we used to always caution people against taking rookie wide receivers because they used to always say, oh, it takes a wide receiver 2 to 3 years to adjust to the speed and the playbooks and everything in the NFL. We're going back now, to the Odell Beckham rookie year, and you can still cite examples before him, obviously, but I would say, notably since he hit the league, you have a rookie wide receiver lighted up every year, sometimes more than one. Last year was a big year, and so it's like, don't be afraid to take a rookie wide receiver. That mentality is an old school mentality that doesn't necessarily apply anymore.
And it's also good to remember that running back and wide receiver, at a minimum, you have to play two of them
Yeah,
every week. So taking a flyer on a guy that's a rookie wide receiver, especially like Jefferson set the record, then Jamar Chase the following year broke it. Stuff like that. Like, you're also going to get value for a lot of rookie wide receivers, because if I remember correctly, Jamar Chase, when he came into the league, I'm sorry, Justin Jefferson, his rookie year, his like average draft pick was, I want to say it was 10 or 11
yeah,
was his ADP, and he was the number one wide receiver, not the number one, probably number 2 or 3 wide receiver fantasy wise in the league. So you don't be afraid, especially in the later rounds, to pick these rookie wide receivers. Like for instance, I picked in one of my late rounds. I think it was our league. In one of the late rounds, I picked up Jameson Williams, because I figured he was going to come back, but it was kind of like a stash because
yeah,
he's a potential keeper. I'm debating. I think it's our league that this happened. I'm debating actually keeping him because of the 6 game suspension.
yep, yep. That can
Because
factor in for sure.
because I probably would be able to get him in the late round anyways
Yeah, and
because
then
of the
just
6 game
stash him for
suspension.
another year. Yeah,
Yeah, and then it doesn't eat up a keeper here. But don't be afraid of these rookie wide receivers, especially if they have a quarterback. Not necessarily a veteran quarterback, but a non-rookie quarterback, second year,
yeah,
third year, that
yeah.
had a good, and look at the passing yards for the previous year
Hmm.
for the quarterback to see, okay, was he accurate?
Yeah,
Did he have yards? What does
yeah,
the offense do?
yeah. If
And don't
he's
be
like a
afraid to pick
rookie,
him.
yeah, if he's like a rookie wide receiver on a run heavy team, then maybe
Right.
it's like, just put it in the right lens, right?
Mhm.
Everything you're saying, just make sure that it's in the right offense where the ceiling is there for him to have that potential.
Yeah, and also one thing to know is if he may be in a run heavy offense, but he may be coming in to where he's gonna end up being the clear cut number one,
Yeah,
but
he's
he's
got to be the
also
man. Yeah,
he's got to be the man. So if he's got to be the man, then he has more upside than if they have, a wide receiver or a couple wide receivers. Then you're looking, oh, is there upside for like defense special teams? Because a lot of leagues, don't play individual defense IDP, you have a team. The player, like for instance, Cordero Patterson, when he ran a touchdown back, he would get the points too for the
Yep.
touchdown.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, and it seems like every year you get one or two of those guys that play flexible positions. And
Mm-hmm.
whether it's Yahoo or ESPN or whatever league you're in, they'll designate them as being more than one title. Sometimes you can make the case for going for those guys. Like if you looked at, I think we talked about this in one of the last videos. If you looked at Taysom Hill last year, I mean, holy shit, if you played him at tight end, you made out like a freaking bandit because of
Mm-hmm.
all the freaking trickery they did with him and all of the opportunities he got at quarterback on top of it. It just led to a ton of fantasy points for a guy that normally would never be allowed to be booked into that slot. And so
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
sometimes you
and
can kind of
I think
circumvent the system.
last year was the first year that Yahoo listed him as QB/tight end. I
Yeah,
think the years before that, he was listed as QB, which there's not value in having him on your
no.
roster then. But it's also he's a kind of a because he was inconsistent. It was
Yeah.
like one week he'd have 20 points, the next week he'd have two.
Well, I know, but if you're waiting till late in the draft to take your tight end,
Mm-hmm.
that's a strategy that's going to pay off more than not.
True, true.
Because a lot of tight ends late in the draft, you might be lucky to get 2 points out of them, James. You just never know. It's dicey.
This
It's
this
dicey.
is true.
Uh, all right, what else do you have, man? I've kind of burned through my list, but I'm sure if you keep talking, I'm sure more stuff will come out of my brain here.
I'm glancing. I think one either you or I hit everything on my list. There's 1 second.
Okay. Yeah, don't force it, you know,
Pay attention.
if you
Yeah,
got it.
that's basically all I had.
Okay. Well, that's cool. That's the first iteration of our fantasy football draft guide, and so yeah, hopefully people like it, and we'll fine tune it this time next year. We'll keep working on it, and maybe we'll get some comments and some things from people that maybe they want us to speak to certain subjects or whatever, and we can do whatever. It's our show. So, but yeah, I'll take us over. We'll do our question of the week here, sticking to the fantasy football theme. I do want to go back and talk about the whole PPR trend. And so, James, you know that PPR for more than a few years now has been picking up a ton of steam. And I would say it's becoming the dominant scoring system for fantasy football. And so, but you have diehards that prefer standard scoring, and then you got the guys that go PPR. Usually, you fall into one of the camps. You love one and you hate one, or vice versa. So let me ask you, which do you prefer, standard scoring or PPR, and why? And while you're thinking about it, I'll give you my answer, which I'm sure you probably know. For me, it's all about standard scoring. I something about PPR just rubs me the wrong way. Like quarterbacks don't get points for pass completions or whatever, and running backs don't get points for rush attempts. Um, I just don't understand why you need to give points for receptions. It's like maybe if you're in a 12 plus team league, it can help give you more depth at running back because you can get some of those guys in a running back by committee. And that I can maybe open my mind to a little bit, but a lot of leagues are 10-team leagues, and I think that you're diluting your pool by going PPR, in my opinion. And then I see the negatives to it, and so I'll go back. I had a personal experience with it. This is 2019. I know that this is going way back now, but um, I was in a PPR league and I had a very strong lead in a weekly matchup and played against a guy who had Saquon Barkley. Barkley did not go crazy. He had 90 total yards between rushing and receiving, 0 touchdowns. But you know, the part that took him over the top was that the dude had 14 receptions in one game. 14 fucking receptions, James. And so, I ended up losing the game. It pissed me off. It really means nothing in the grand scheme of things, but it's an easy situation to point to because those 14 receptions really didn't help the team move the ball down the field that much and help them win the game. And it's like your yards that you move the ball down the field is what matters, and that's what gets you into position to score and whatever else. It's like if you're dinking ducking it or you're throwing big passes, it doesn't matter. It's all about those inches adding up. And so to me, the PPR thing, I don't know. I don't like it. Just my opinion. What do you think, James?
Oh, I'm an old man. Get off my lawn.
Well, thank you. Enlighten me, James.
I like the fractional PPR, not the whether it's quarter or half, because of the fact that I think it brings intrigue and it brings more strategy and it brings something more to look at. Let's go back. Fantasy football started in like the '60s, and
So
it was
you want another stat category, is what you're saying.
and it was just hear me out.
Okay.
It was started by a couple members of the Raiders organization in the front office who started it. When fantasy football started out, you only got points per touchdown. You didn't get any yards whatsoever. Do you know what caused that change? Barry Sanders caused that change because Barry Sanders had a whole shitload of yards and not a lot
a ton
of
of touchdowns.
So he would have a 200 yard game and 0 touchdowns, and therefore people got 0 points from having Barry Sanders on their team.
Okay.
It adds a dimension, getting yards, getting a fractional PPR. I'm not quite in the full boat of a full PPR because I don't think you should get a full point for just catching the ball. I can get on like half a point or a quarter of a point
Sure.
for it because yeah, it may seem like it's not doing anything for the team, but fantasy football isn't about what you're doing for the team. It's about that player's performance on the field.
Well, I know, but if a quarterback throws the ball 50 times, it's they might only complete 25 or whatever. I'm just saying it's like just because you're forcing the guy to be involved doesn't mean it's helping.
Right. But he is when Saquon had those 14 balls, he was doing his job. He was catching the ball when it was thrown to him. In a PPR league, yeah, a point is a little much. I agree with that.
Yeah, but he was already getting credit for the yards.
Right, but how many of those catches were behind the line of scrimmage? That he then got credit for the yards, but he only got partial credit for the yards because he caught it.
All right.
He caught the ball and had
10
yards after 10 yards after catch, but was only credited for 7 yards. I'm just saying it adds a dimension and strategy, and I think fantasy football is more of a strategic game than it is and it's strategic, but also luck. And the strategy behind it, I think, makes it more interesting to me because then I could pick up, like, I get a running back hurt, and I could pick up a running back that, he doesn't get a lot of yards, but, he's throwing the ball 20 times a game, and so find that
it gives you a deeper waiver wire to look from.
Yeah, and it makes you sit down and analyze, and also keeps it interesting in the game because you could have a player, like you said, you're down a lot of points. That player probably had a better less of a chance, or probably thought they were done, and they're like, oh shit, I'm still in this game once
Sure.
Saquon was
Yeah.
starting to go off. And I liken that. I forgot my analogy I was going to make, so I'm just going to leave it there.
All right. Well, and that's fine, James. And like I mean, hey, yeah, old man Huffmaster over here, can't get with the times, whatever it is. But I'll tell you this, all right. So once upon a time ago, I was in the league, and I was in the league for a number of years, and it was stat category overload. And so I think that you got to be careful with that too. And maybe if it's like, okay, we're just sliding into PPR and we think there's value and whatever else, okay, maybe I'll come around to it. But I'll tell you what, I was in a league where, in addition to all of the normal stuff we're talking about, you got a point if the player's team won the game. You got extra points depending on how many rush attempts the running back had. You got extra points depending on how many receptions the wide receiver had. You got extra points depending on how many pass attempts the quarterback had. And so it just, it's like all I'm saying is that when you start sprinkling in too much, then it can't even really be strategic anymore. Then
Mm-hmm.
it's just purely luck at that point. And so
Yeah,
I'm just saying don't make it too complicated that you can't ever get an edge anymore because then it's just not going to be fun to play.
yeah, and that makes sense. I'm not saying overly set overly low stats because a extra point, some of that stuff is ridiculous. Like an extra point if your team if they won,
Yeah.
who the fuck? Maybe for defense special teams, if they won the game, they did their job.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
outside of that, like it's so much out of like a quarterback. A quarterback that won the game didn't didn't do much more than his regular job. Where a defense has to like you. There's factors that go into
Yeah.
winning the game. Like maybe they had a couple huge stops that caused them
Yeah.
to win the game.
Well, and when you're doing your rankings, you got to add that new category in and you got to say, oh, I think Tom Brady and the Patriots are going to win 12 games this year. So add 12 points to his season totals and then adjust his points per game and where does he rank now? I mean, dude, it makes it very complicated, man. And so
Yeah,
it's and
yeah.
and that doesn't mean it's right, wrong, or indifferent. It just means it was not for me. And to date, PPR has not been for me because I feel like it dilutes the value of the pool. And it's almost like you're saying you can have guys get hurt and it's easier to find replacements. Well, you know, because of that, I don't think you have to do as much work. And that's where
See,
there's benefit for
I
guys
don't
like
think it's.
us.
I don't. I wasn't trying to say it was easier to find replacements, but it puts a
They're there if you do the
strategy.
look if you look
It
for them.
puts a strategy behind finding the replacements. Um, I do agree with you. There are at some point there's too much. I happen to like PPR. I was in a league once where the player and the team defense special teams got yards or got points for return yardage.
Yeah, that's a game changer too. That's a
And
real game changer. Yeah.
and it's I did the reason I don't like that one is because so you're rewarding the defense special teams for allowing points and then getting because it was kick returns too. So for
Yeah.
allowing points and then getting yardage back on the
Yep.
kickoff,
Yeah.
it's like
Logically,
that.
it's going against. Yeah.
Yeah,
They wouldn't
yeah.
have had
So
that return if you'd have stopped them. Yeah.
exactly.
I got you. Okay. All right. Well, I'll get off of it. And so, yeah, I mean, hey, that's all I got for tonight, James. You got any closing thoughts here, man?
No, I think that's about all I had.
Okay. Well, hey, hopefully we get some takers for Name That Stadium and commenting on our fantasy football draft guide. We've got 25 freaking subscribers, and we've had now plenty of videos go over 200 views. I know the off season we've had a couple dip below that, but this is one I think as we get to the start of the season, it's going to have some staying power. Maybe this will be, fingers crossed, a new record video for us, James. And so I'll be telling all my friends and family. I hope you do the same, bud.
I will be.
All right, guys. Well, hey, we hope you liked the show. If you did, hit that subscribe button and the like or whatever, yada, yada, yada. Thank you. And I think we're off next week, right,
Yeah,
James?
we're off next week. I'm going on vacation, so
Yeah. So we're off next week, and then the following week we'll be back, and we'll come up with some topic. So
yeah, I think if my math is correct, the following week we have to start our
division.
conference, our division
Okay. Yeah.
projected records. If my math was correct on it,
Okay.
we might
Yeah.
we might have one more week, but I think it was next week.
It's getting serious.
Yeah.
I like it. All right. Cool. Well, hey, bud. I hope you have a good night. It was fun, man.
All right, sounds good. Have a good one.
Gridiron Grinder. Hut hut hike.